Thank you. Thanks, Bob, for the invitation to talk with everyone today. And thanks everyone for joining. I realize you're all very busy and yeah, I may be standing between you and your dessert or maybe your evening beverage. So I have a presentation for you today. I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet, obviously focused on an important kind of new invasive species here. The spotted lanternfly, and I'll focus specifically on what we know. And by we, I mean really a lot of work out of Pennsylvania because they've had this insect for many years before it showed up here in Indiana. So a lot about what we know in terms of their threat to vineyards and also what's being done and what you can do looking ahead to spotted lanternfly. I should also mention, I almost forgot to introduce myself. You all know I'm Elizabeth, but I'm a horticultural crop IPM or integrated pest management specialist in the Department of Entomology on Purdue's main campus. So my main or primary job is to conduct applied research and really kind of deliver that into practical solutions and recommendations for people who, are farming or in agriculture. That's their living. So I'm really passionate about insects, but I'm also really passionate about sharing this information in a way that's helpful for those of you who may, in this case, have a vineyard and want to know what to do, hopefully ease some of your concerns, and then, keep you abreast of what we're doing on the applied research side. So Bob mentioned at the end of the presentation, there's going to be another poll asking, what you thought. I would love to have your feedback. I'm actually begging you to please complete that poll. That's going to tell me how good of a job I do in this session tonight and how I can improve. So with that, I will get started. Let's see. Okay, so first things first, we're all talking about spotted lanternfly because it was first detected here in Indiana in July of 2021, down here in Switzerland County. And I remember hearing about this and kind of thought, dun, 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 it's time, the thing we've all been dreading. And more recently, just last year, in August or so, another population was identified up in Huntington County, Indiana, here where this other star is. So just want to let you know that the Indiana Department of Natural Resources and the State Department of Agriculture are actively working in these areas, trying to decide kind of the seriousness of the infestation, how to proceed with management. And at any time, if you want more information about how that's going, you can visit this link here, which hopefully you'll still have access to in the recording. So that's kind of where we are. At least we don't have it in a bunch of counties so far as we know, but that's kind of what we know and why we're worried about it now. Hoping it wouldn't have been so soon, but you know how these invasive insects are, they get around. So just a brief outline here. I mentioned this already, but I want to focus on what we know about spotted lanternfly, particularly in vineyards. So I'll just very briefly talk about the life cycle and the biology of the spotted lanternfly. Not too many details because I realize some of you may not love insects as much as me. Then I'll get to the real important part, the current management efforts, particularly in vineyards, and give you the research updates in that space. And then just wrap up with what you can do to prepare and help stop the spread, because that's really where we're at right now. If you're not in one of those counties where spotted lanternfly has been detected, really one of the best things you can do is know what to look for, be vigilant, and know how to report if you see something. So just a little bit of kind of a big picture overview of the spotted lanternfly. This is a plant hopper. It's native to China, India, and Vietnam, and was actually first reported as an invasive insect in South Korea in 2004, and then made its way to the US in Pennsylvania, particularly in 2014, which seems like a really long time ago, but maybe not so much. And one of the things I want to emphasize about spotted lanternfly is that there is good news. At least it's not this insect that stings or bites. In fact, they're just these kind of, I think very attractive and showy insects that hop around. So the good news is they can't sting or bite you. They're not going to be harmful to your kids if, when and if, and your pets, I should mention, if they're out there eating insects off the ground or your kids are out there. So that's the good news. It's not an insect that harms us directly. So since 2014, the spotted lanternfly has spread quickly. So to 34 Pennsylvania counties, it may even be more than that now, and 12 states in the US here, and I have them listed. And so, of course, this is a lot of movement in a relatively short period of time. And I'll be talking more about this and showing you some images to really drive this point home. But this insect really has been able to move around because it's such a great hitchhiker. Certain life stages are hard to spot. And as a result, we move things that these insects have a certain life stage on, mainly their egg masses. And so we're moving them around without really realizing that they're there. And so that's one of the ways that this insect has been able to spread so quickly. So just giving you a little bit about the insect itself. Insects like the spotted lanternfly have these piercing sucking mouth parts. So they're kind of like aphids or stink bugs. They have a little needle-like or straw-like mouth part, and they tap into that plant, not the fruits necessarily. They're feeding on the actual plant to sip on the sap. So they're sucking out all the plant juices that the plant needs to grow and photosynthesize. Right now, we know that the spotted lanternfly attacks at least 70 plants, including the ones I have listed here. Grapes are a really important commodity crop that they can damage, and they seem to like a lot. But also hops, other stone fruits, apples, and also pines. And I should mention some other trees like the walnuts in the hardwood industry. So why do we care about this insect? Insects feed on plants all over the place all the time. What's the big deal? In the case of the spotted lanternfly, they're feeding, and particularly large groups of them feeding on plants at once, cause this wilting, this dieback. In the case of grapevines, it can actually kill them. And as if that's not bad enough, all the waste that they produce in the insect world or entomology field, we call that honeydew, their liquid waste. It drops out and accumulates on the surfaces of plants, causing, well, allowing for kind of a surface for molds and things to grow, a medium, I should say. And it also blocks photosynthesis of these plants. And I've heard from folks in Pennsylvania that in areas, residential areas where the spotted lanternfly is a big problem, it's also a huge nuisance. It's hard for them to sit out on their back patio and enjoy the evening because this honeydew is like raining down from the trees and getting all over their patios, and it's sticky and gross. So it's also kind of a aesthetic pest as well. But in terms of the plants, those are the main things that I have bolded there that we're concerned about, and that's why we care. So just an example to drive this home here, we have a large aggregation here of the adult spotted lanternflies on a grapevine. And so aggregation here just meaning a large group of these insects. And so it's this we feed in mass kind of strategy that overwhelms the plants and kind of causes them to ooze or bleed out, which is in some cases a plant's defense to stop these insects, but it doesn't quite work that way in the case of grapevines. So I just want to mention also here, you'll notice, I think this is a nice image to demonstrate how they're really feeding on the canes of the plant, not necessarily on the berries. They're not really interested in those. And I'll also mention that we're still learning. Again, I use the royal we. This is a lot of research going on in Pennsylvania at Penn State. We're still learning the impacts of the spotted lanternfly and other specialty crops. But we do know that vineyards, it's a big concern. Okay, so that was the biology and life cycle, or I guess the overview of the spotted lanternfly. I just briefly want to talk about the biology and life cycle here, just with this one single diagram and several photos following up here. And this is the life cycle. And the main thing I want you to take away from here, I guess two key things. One, this is the egg mass, and there's some better images later in the presentation about what these actually look like with some nice photos. But this is the life stage that is the hitchhiking stage. This is how we think the spotted lanternfly has made its way all over the place. These egg masses are hard to spot if you don't know what to look for. I remember seeing one for the first time and thought, oh my gosh, I would never recognize that. So I just really want to emphasize that and prime you later in the presentation to look at those pictures so you have a sense of what to look for. And then, like many other insects, there are many life stages. So here, of course, the eggs, then we have four immature stages that are called instars, and each of these just gets bigger than the last. Some people say they kind of look like stink bugs. Some even say they kind of look like large ticks. I'll let you be the judge of that in the next few photos. But the main thing is here, the nymphs don't have wings, so they can't fly. You're going to see them crawling on the plants if you do see them. And then this fourth instar nymph is going to be pretty large. These little lumps on its back here, you can see it's developing those wings. When it molts from that fourth instar, then it becomes the adult, and you'll see the wings and this really bright coloring. And they're around for a while from July through December. And then the female will lay the eggs and the cycle will continue. So if you do revisit this, this particular slide, I think another thing I want to drive home here is to know when during the when during the year you can expect to see each of these life stages. So I just have those months of the year in these little gold boxes to draw your attention to them. So, and the key thing with the egg mass is they're around in the environment from October to June. So that's a pretty long period. And so really knowing what to look for and where to look is going to be key to helping, or to each of us doing our part to stop the spread. So just a few more images here to give you kind of context for how big these insects are, what they look like. Here's that first instar nymph all the way to second, third, and fourth. I kind of feel like you're not going to see another insect out there that looks like this, but maybe that's just the bug nerd in me talking. But they're very brightly colored. They kind of have this little snout sticking out there. Here we have an adult on someone's finger to give you a sense of how big they are in terms of their length from head to tip of the abdomen here. And then these insects, when they're startled or they feel threatened, they'll flash their wings. And the hind set of wings has this bright red color. And so I think that's pretty diagnostic, in my opinion. If you're not, I'm not thinking you're going to see other insects. I want to make sure I'm not saying too much about what I think, but I feel pretty confident that you're not going to see other insects with this bright coloration around and not be suspicious, like that it's not spotted lanternfly. Okay, so here we have a photo of a tree with actually a tree band. This is a sticky kind of trap that's been used to try to stop the adults from crawling up into the tree. But I think it's also a great example, again, to see a sense of how large the adults are. And you'll notice that when they're at rest, their wings are kind of held tent-like over their abdomen or the rest of their body. I already mentioned the bright color of the hind wings that they might flash when they're threatened. And importantly, they're plant hoppers. So they're good jumpers, but not very good flyers. And so a lot of times the adults, what we know about their movement in vineyards, for example, they're able to move, you know, they move more easily in the landscape with the assistance of wind. So if it's a breezy day, they'll kind of glide along like a kite, and that helps them move. But on their own, they're not really flying long distances. Okay, so just a close-up again of the adults with their wings held tent-like over the body at rest. And we got the gray tips of the wings here, the little speckles that some might say are, like me, are kind of a nice pattern. They're pretty, but they're also pretty pesky. Here's that third instar nymph, a really nice image. I think these white spots, again, are pretty unique to the instar or this immature stage. So something to look for, or look for and compare if you see other insects. And then here's that fourth instar nymph. I think it looks very different. I'll just point out again here that it's got those little lumps on its back. These are the wing pads that eventually it will have when it emerges from this stage to the next stage, which will be the adult. Okay, so the eggs. I mentioned this before, and I just want to emphasize, this is the thing to look for because it's the easily missed hitchhiker stage. So we know from the last almost 10 years of work that's been done in Pennsylvania about unspotted lanternfly, the eggs and the egg masses are laid on all types of different surfaces or substrates. And so we know that they'll lay them on tree trunks, woody stems, even patio furniture. Stone is another one that we're learning more and more. The side of rail cars because they're smooth. Not really sure why they like that type of surface, but those are areas to check, especially if you're coming in and out of areas where you know the spotted lanternfly is present. So here you can see this is the kind of muddy, that's the term people use, dried mud, kind of cakey goo on the top of that the female uses to cover the eggs. And this actually protects the eggs from, you know, other insects, other natural enemies that might be trying to get to them. So if you scrape that mass away, or sometimes I guess the females don't actually cover the eggs with this mass, this is what the actual eggs themselves look like. So the uncovered eggs here, I kind of feel like these look like pine nuts. Hope that doesn't ruin pine nuts for anybody. But yeah, so this is what the eggs look like uncovered. And then these masses are what you're typically going to see that folks have been training actively on the ground to look for so they can go out and scrape them off and burn them. They've also got dogs that they've trained to sniff out these egg masses, which is pretty amazing, but that's like a whole nother talk. So in that previous photo, that egg mass looked pretty obvious, but I just want to give an example of a picture I found online, again, from the PA Department of Agriculture, where here is a covered egg mass on a large stone that someone has on their property. So I don't know about you. I am not sure I would know that's spotted lanternfly egg mass. I might walk past that many times. Even if I looked, I'm not even sure I would recognize it. So again, just emphasizing here the importance of knowing what to look for and, um, you know, making yourself familiar as best as possible. And if you have doubt, you can always take a photo. And actually, I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation, how you can report if you see something that you suspect is spotted lanternfly. Okay, so just getting into the current management efforts and updates. I realize I'm already going a little bit long, so I try I won't be quite so wordy. But there's some key things I want to share with you about how we're managing spotted lanternfly, again, based on efforts in Pennsylvania. So there's the tree banding, also the circle trunk traps. And these are things that are more monitoring. They get stuck there, they get trapped inside, so you can go out to wherever these traps are placed to find to see if anyone is there, to see if they're present. And in the case of those tree bands, they can, to some extent, help stop the nymphs and adults from crawling up the trees. Folks are also going out and doing coordinated efforts to scrape egg masses from trees and burn them. And something else that folks are still doing is removing preferred host trees. And this is particularly the tree of heaven. And this is a native host of the spotted lanternfly. So it does really, really well on that particular tree. So removing that removes a tree that allows these insects to really reach their maximum potential in terms of their fitness and how many eggs they can lay. So those are some of the monitoring strategies. I'm sure many in the audience are wondering, well, what about insecticides? Do they work? Do we have insecticide tools that are effective against the spotted lanternfly? And the answer is yes. There are many broad spectrum insecticides, particularly in vineyards that, if you do have a commercial vineyard or just, well, I should say commercial vineyard, there's a lot of products if you have a pesticide applicator's license. And a lot of those products are going to be effective against spotted lanternfly. So that's good news. You're not going to have to get new chemistry or find new products. We have things that will knock them down pretty well. One of the challenges, though, with using these insecticides is kind of like, I'll use the example of treating your grapevines for Japanese beetle. So they tend to come in waves, right? You can spray, but they just keep coming. They keep coming. So that makes them really challenging to manage. You can't spray the entire area, to keep them out because more are just going to come in. So that's one of the challenges that we're still trying to understand in terms of managing this insect with insecticides. There are organic insecticides and also biological products, so entomopathogenic or insect-infecting fungi and bacteria, and these can show some efficacy. But as we know with many of these organic products or biological products, they depend on the environment. So if it's really rainy, really hot, very up and down, it can make the residual activity of those products much less predictable. But there are products that are effective and that are working. So just want to share that information with folks in the audience who may be wondering about the tools that are available for spraying. So just an example here of the newer circle trunk trap that, in this case has been placed on Tree of Heaven to capture the spotted lanternfly. So here we just have a mesh that's been wrapped around the whole tree. And as they crawl up, no matter which side they're on, they're going to be funneled by this netting up into this container. And this is actually a kill strip or an insecticidal piece of insecticide treated strip. And so when they come into contact with it, they die. And if you're coming out and you're, monitoring these traps, you see spotted lanternfly is there. So it's a really useful tool, especially, in Indiana here, where we're still trying to figure out where they are and how bad the spread is. So I want to focus on one particular, I think, really great example of a research project that's been done particularly in grapevines by two sisters, Leach and Leach. And so they went out to 7 to 9 vineyards over the course of a year. And I have the cultivars here: Pinot Noir, Petit Verdot, Gewürztraminer, one of my favorites, and Traminette grapes. And they actually went out and their goal was to ask or understand when during the season are the spotted lanternfly life stages, particularly the nymphs, which can't fly, and the adults, which can. When are they present on the grapevines? Where are they on the grapevines? The shoots, the cordons, or the trunk? And what time of day are they most active on the grapevines? And this was a crazy, amazing study because they actually were out there watching not only where they were and what they were doing throughout the day, but really taking detailed notes, right? If they were on the grapevines, were they feeding? Were they mating? Were they just sitting there? So this is a really great study that I wanted to highlight because it's so unique and specific to the vineyard setting. So just to orient everyone, if you aren't familiar with grapevines, I just want to have a little bit of terminology here to cover some terminology for you. So of course we've got the main part of the grapevine, the trunk that's coming up out of the ground. Then we've got kind of the arms here. This is called the cordon. And then we've got the canes, which are the part which can be trained in different ways or depending on the trellis system that you might have in your vineyard. But so these are some terms you're going to hear me mentioning, particularly the cordon, the canes, and the trunk. So I just want folks to know what I'm talking about when I talk about where these insects are in the vineyard. Okay, so I'm going to show you some figures in the next slide, but I just want to cover in the big picture what they found. And I think this is really useful for those of you who have a vineyard so you know where to look and when. So they found the nymphs of the spotted lanternfly on the grapevines in the spring, mainly May through July. But not many of them. The populations of these nymphs were pretty low, less than 5 of these nymphs per vine. When they looked to the adults, it wasn't until late summer, like August, October, when the populations really started to grow. And this is when the adults were coming into the vineyard and landing on these plants. So where are the nymphs, you know, coming from originally? Maybe up from egg masses that were laid on those grapevines. We're not quite sure, but I think it's notable that you don't really see many nymphs on the grapevines. Maybe it's not a good host for them, or they're just not as likely to do well there. But for the adults, the vineyard seems to be the place to be. They're able to get good resources and they're there. So they observed that both feeding and dispersal, or their movement activity, increased throughout the day. So in the morning, not much activity. Maybe like us, if you haven't had your coffee yet, you're kind of slow, not moving a lot. And as the day goes on, and of course the temperatures rise, they started to see activity really increase. They're moving around more, they're more active, particularly in the afternoon and into the evening. So they have this really nice figure in their paper that they published that I want to share with you here, because I think, well, an image speaks 1,000 words, but I do want to break it down for you a little bit. So you're actually going to see multiple panels like this 1A here. We're going to see B, C, D, and E. But just to orient you here, we're looking at panel A, and on the y-axis here, we have the average number of spotted lanternfly per vine. And then you see this kind of pie chart. And in this case, the amount of that pie that's shaded is the proportion of that particular life stage that they observed on the grapevine. And then, oh, I'm sorry, the color represents where. So shoots are in black. The cordon, which is the arm, the 2 arms of the grapevine, that's going to be gray. And then the hashed open color is going to be the trunk. So here we're looking specifically at the first instar nymph. This is the first stage after hatching from the egg. And then way down here on the x-axis, we have each of the months of the year. So what you see here is, boop, there's a peak right here in activity of the first instar nymphs. They are almost exclusively found on the shoots of the grapevine, let's say early, well, I guess kind of early June. That's what this figure is indicating here with this line, and then it drops off. We don't see the first instar nymphs anymore. The next panel, oh, I guess I'm going to show you all of them at the same time. So panel B here, we have the next life stage, the second instar, and you'll see they, most of their activity, not quite a huge peak, but we do start to see them, June through July, or maybe beginning of July, then they drop off. And again, they're found almost exclusively on the shoots of the grapevine. We move down to the next life stage, the third instar nymph. We start to see they're moving to different parts of the grapevine. So here, mostly on the shoots again, but now the third instar nymphs are kind of moving to the cordon of the plant or of the vines. And the peak activity of these third instar nymphs seems to happen, early July or so. And then things level off. I mean, these flat lines are indicating that those insects were not found later in the months or later in the year during those months. Moving to D here, we have the final immature stage, the fourth instar nymph. You can again see those wing pads forming. It's thinking about turning into adult and flying. In this case, we see an even larger proportion of this particular life stage on the cordon of the grapevine, but still a good majority of them on the shoots. And then finally, when we look at the adult stage, here we see things really start to, they're occupying multiple parts of the grapevine. So again, still mostly on the shoots, but moving into the cordons and also the trunk. And I think this is interesting because the trunk, you know, these are woody vines, right? They can pierce that and feed on it. So maybe it's just a place where they're able to access more content. You know, they can really hit the main part of the plant to sip the sap, as I've mentioned. So, and their activity, as I mentioned before, the researchers found really peaks kind of early September, excuse me, and then it kind of drops off a little bit, but stays pretty high. And so lots of activity around between September and October on all three parts of the plant. And then if we look here, this dotted line just represents kind of the post-harvest period. And you can see post-harvest, there are almost 50% of the adults that they observe on the grapevine are now on the trunks of the grapevines. So I know that was a lot. Hopefully that made sense, and I was able to guide you through this kind of complicated figure, but I think the takeaway message here that I think is really powerful about this study is we know based on their work, their very meticulous work, where on the grapevines you can look to find each of these life stages throughout the season. So the take-home message here, I guess I just kind of mentioned that. So now we know when during the season the different life stages are most active in terms of months of the year, and then where on the grapevines you can find them. So based on where they are, you might consider whether they can fly away or not. This can help growers inform the timing of the management efforts. I do want to mention that even though spotted lanternfly seems to really like grapevines, and it is a problem, can cause a lot of damage, there seems to be some we're not really certain about how much damage they're actually doing to the grapevines in the given year, and particularly on effects on yield and vine survival. And this is because anyone who has a vineyard knows that grapevines are so I lost my word. They can grow very quickly and they're productive. And so some people in the research community are saying that, you know, these grapevines could compensate from any damage or the loss of the photosynthetes or the plant sap. And so, you know, you lose that, you can still maintain lateral shoots that can be pruned and, you know, could still be there next year. But more and more folks are kind of focusing in on that post-harvest period because they seem to be thinking or seeing that adults feeding on the trunk of the grapevine, you know, going into the winter, that's when the vines are trying to return, right, all of their nutrients from the shoots down to the roots to be able to survive the winter, to be fit and hardy to bud out the next spring. And so them feeding on the trunk could be really tapping or stealing some of the nutrients these grapevines need to do well the next season. And so that could potentially have a negative impact on their winter hardiness or winter survival. So that's kind of where, to my knowledge, you know, the research in the grapevine space is with the spotted lanternfly. Okay, so I just want to mention just a couple more slides here, insecticides for spotted lanternfly in Indiana, because I do get a lot of questions about what we can spray and label interpretation here. So the good news is, and I mentioned this before, there are many insecticides that you can use on grapes here in Indiana, especially if you have a commercial applicator's license or pesticide applicator's license. And they do work against spotted lanternflies. So no need to worry that you won't be able to stop these insects with a chemical tool. I would advise, though, at this time, unless you're in one of those areas and you have an outbreak, and I really hope that's not the case, you do not need to spray right now your grapevines for spotted lanternfly or any other fruit trees for that matter. Please, at this time, save your product, save your time and money, and hopefully it won't get as bad as it has been in Pennsylvania, because we've learned a lot from what they've been doing. But at this time, you know, no need to spray anything. And I always want to remind people to look at the label very carefully. And of course, the label is the law. If you do have questions about a particular product, or let's say, for example, you want to spray aphids on your grapevines, and maybe when spotted lanternfly shows up, is there a product that you could use to spray both? That would be great. Two birds with one stone, or two insects with one spray, I guess I should say. Any of those types of questions about how to apply, questions about the label, please don't hesitate to reach out to your local county extension office or educator. And we coordinate with them. So if there are questions that are kind of uncertain, we know who to reach out to make sure you have the best information and you follow the product's label in a way that's safe for you and your products. So very, very quickly moving forward, what can you do right now to help stop the spread of spotted lanternfly? And these are things I've already mentioned that maybe you saw coming. If you're traveling in and out of a county or a zone where spotted lanternfly has been detected, please check your vehicle and any outdoor equipment that you took with you on your holiday to have a good time or maybe tailgate at a game. Things like grills, mowers, outdoor furniture. The adults seem to lay their eggs on those. So those are things you can do when you're moving in and out of the zone. Not just looking for those egg masses, but depending on the time of year. And if you're, again, going into an area where you know spotted lanternfly is present, please, look for the different life stages, make sure you're not moving one on accident, in your bicycle basket, right? That maybe it fell in there and you take it back home. So know what life stages to look for on any things you may be moving in and out of that, of a spotted lanternfly detected or positive zone. You've all likely heard this before because I'm guessing that most are aware of the emerald ash borer. Don't move firewood or large stone because we do know that's an excellent way to accidentally move invasive insects, but also just in case egg masses are on that firewood, please don't take it home from a campsite or a different area. Really, regardless of whether you're in a spotted lanternfly detected zone or not. But again, those are two key things you can do. I did mention before that, the spotted lanternfly has this preferred host, the tree of heaven. If you do have this tree on your property, you can go out and take them out because they seem to do really well on these trees, so they can contribute to a more rapid, productive population. So you can take those out. I have a link down here about how to identify tree of heaven because there are some other trees that kind of look like it. But, if you see these kinds of trees in an urban area or woodland edges, roadsides, these are very common kind of weedy invasive trees in these types of areas. And last but not least, if you see something that looks like spotted lanternfly, please take a picture of it, mark your location, and contact your your local Purdue County Extension office or the Department of Agriculture. I have the number here highlighted for you. And importantly, if you do find something that you think is spotted lanternfly, please don't pick it up and put it in a container to collect it or bring it to somebody. That seems like a good idea, but I guess maybe folks have done that and they've dropped the bag or maybe they got out. So they ended up moving it to another place when really they were trying to collect it and bring it to get a positive ID. So please don't collect any of the life stages, adults, eggs, just leave them where they are. You're way better off taking a photo and letting one of the two offices or departments that have listed here know that you suspect something. And I've been told by them that they are not going to judge you if you send a picture of a cow. If you think it's spotted lanternfly, it doesn't matter how wrong you are. They're going to be very appreciative to know that you're on the lookout and helping us all in the state of Indiana be vigilant so that we can know where it's going and hopefully help stop the spread. Okay, so I really was hoping to do that in 20 minutes, but I went a little long. Thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if we have a few minutes.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is, do spotted lanternfly suck sap from wild grapevines?
Yes, they do. They will feed on, I don't know that anyone's particularly looked at their damage to the grapevines, but absolutely, I'm sure they'll feed on them.
And that could mean that they have an acceptable host too that they're using. Like if you have wild grapes out near your property, then yeah, you could be looking at a concerning situation there.
That's a good point.
And then we also have another question: will spotted lanternfly kill tree of heaven?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I suspect if enough of them were on the plant and feeding that heavily, they could stress the plant and kill it, as we've seen with like other maybe young grapevines or young nursery trees. I think that's possible, but I actually don't know if anyone has reported that. Do you know, Bob?
So from the evidence that I've seen, strong, healthy tree of heaven will definitely have a severe reduction in their health, but they may not necessarily die. Tree of heaven's kind of nasty in that way.
Yeah.
If they're weak or young, then I think the potential exists, but I'm not sure if DNR has collected that data yet to be sure.
Okay.
So we also have, how do they survive the winter? How resistant are they to cold weather?
Ooh, that's a good question. It seems like I'm surprised how long the adults kind of survive during the season, into December. But I think the focal life stage that they're overwintering in is the egg stage. So they're, those little pine nut kind of eggs underneath that hard mass. They're apparently able to survive a typical winter in our region. I know our winters haven't been that cold the last few years. If it was real cold, maybe that would kill them off. But as far as we know, and also based on what we know about the overwintering or the egg masses in like similar latitudes where this insect is native, they can survive just fine in that the winters and given the life stage. But most of the nymphs, the adults, they're not going to last as long.
Yeah, so you're not looking at a situation where it's like a stink bug that's going to come into your home. They'll die
Yeah.
off, but they
Mhm.
are very successful with their egg masses surviving our winters.
Mhm.
Okay, do we have any other questions this evening? All right, I am not seeing any coming up in the chat. So what I'll say is thank you, Elizabeth, for donating your time to us. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having
And
me.
again, we are going to have that survey pop up. So please consider taking that if you'd like. It is completely voluntary though. But with that, I will go ahead and let everybody get back to their evening and thank all of you for coming tonight. Be safe out there.